Yeah. Welcome, welcome. We will give everybody a second to come in and get settled. But we just want to welcome you all to our webinar today, How to Price Your Monthly Rental. My name is Katie Lyon. I work at Furnished Finder and I'm also a midterm rental landlord myself. I have about 13 midterm rentals right now, and we have one long term. So obviously, we highly prefer the midterm rental strategy. And I'm here with Jeff, who is the CEO at Furnished Finder, and Richie, who is the CEO and founder over at PriceLabs. So today we're going to have an open discussion about pricing your monthly rental, different strategies. And we're going to answer some of the most common questions that we hear so you can hear it straight from the experts themselves. So without further ado, I'm going to let Jeff introduce himself, tell you a little bit more about himself and Furnished Finder, and then we will pass it to Richie.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeff Hurst, coming to you from Austin, Texas. If you're curious about the wallpaper behind me, they're Austin, Texas landmarks. And tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm the CEO and president here at Furnished Finder. I've been here a little over a year and a half. We are a marketplace for monthly furnished rentals. Before this, I used to be the president of Verbo and was the chief operating officer of Expedia Group. And so have a lot of short-term rental experience also, including owning 3 short-term rentals myself. I have a beach property in South Padre, Texas, a lake house outside of Boston, and a ranch property on the San Marcos River near Gonzales. So I am very familiar with the dynamics of short-term rental pricing, and I have always very much admired my colleague today, Richie, and the progress they've made over at PriceLabs these past years, and really leading the way and how dynamic pricing and yield management works for short-term rentals. So with that, I'll let Richie introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Jeff, thank you firstly, and thank you Katie for having me. My name's Richie. I'm one of the co-founders at PriceLabs. PriceLabs is a dynamic pricing software for the short-term rental market, but we also cater to mid-term rentals and small hotels. We've been doing this for 11 years. We price a little over 500,000 homes today around the world. I started this because I was putting my house 11 years ago on short-term rentals, and I was pricing flat at $80 or $100 a night. And that didn't make sense. And I'm sure like all of us have booked a flight or looked at pricing in some form where we have encountered dynamic pricing, or maybe it's Uber, maybe it's Lyft or something else, right? And so similarly, encountering that made me feel like there should be a better, smarter way for pricing short-term rentals. And over the years, we've also started to think about how do we also help mid-term rental hosts, right? In very similar ways. So as we go through, I'm excited to chat about how we think about midterm rental pricing and how we see that landscape evolve in coming years. And once again, thank you, Jeff and Katie, for having me.
Our pleasure to be
Love
here.
it. And I just want to make just a couple of quick admin notes for everybody. We are absolutely live, so if we have any tech issues, your patience is totally appreciated. And also, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We do have 2 team members who are in the chat live to answer any questions that you might have. And if we have time at the end, we will answer some questions live with Jeff and Richie as well. So before we really get going, we want to get to know you. So if you can hop into that poll and let us know, do you currently host short-term, mid-term, long-term? Are you brand new? Or is it something completely else? Maybe you're just here because, you know, you stumbled upon this. I don't know. Let us know who you are, where you're from, so we can cater our answers and conversations more to you. It's the benefit of having this be a true live presentation. While you guys answer that, I'm going to let Jeff give a little bit more of an overview of monthly, because I just saw someone ask in the chat, what is monthly rental or what is midterm rental?
Thank you, Katie. So this, monthly rental market, some people call them midterm rentals, but the way tenants talk about it is monthly furnished rentals. They search things like monthly furnished rentals, or they'll search for a sublet, or they'll search for those types of terms. Furnished Finder's been around about 10 years, so we actually started in a similar time as PriceLabs with a similar story. Our founder got married, had an extra home that was furnished when they got married, didn't know what to do, started renting out to nurses. A few years later, COVID hit, and they had several thousand properties. And by June of 21, there were 50,000 properties on Furnished Finder. Fast forward 4 years, we've got 300,000 properties, and so you've really seen this explosive growth. When people shop the category, they primarily shop Furnished Finder, or they're shopping apartments.com Zillow, which typically are unfurnished and longer term, or they're shopping Airbnb. And so the use cases, and we think we've got more properties than Airbnb, but it's hard for us to know for sure. They certainly have more properties overall when you look at their short-term selection. And then the last use case is people shop for like extended stay America. And so you'll read a lot about hotels expanding into this midterm space, but that's who your tenants are. And what we do is we have 300,000 national properties to serve them. And it's a combination of rooms and whole homes. When you think about who's coming, this is what's changed the most for those of you who've been in the category a while. If you had been with us 3 or 4 years ago, it was probably 75% traveling nurses. And so healthcare was what we were known for, in particular in the pandemic. Since then, we've really expanded our reach into kind of business corporate travel, which includes a lot of construction. Relocation is the fastest growing. Families are moving from Seattle to Austin, and they want to try before they buy, and they don't want to move their furniture 3 times. And so they're either starting over or getting into a furnished situation. Academia is a big use case, in particular professors and grad students, and others just the long tail, but it includes leisure, which would be a lot of people who are in the short-term space are actually looking for off-season renters. We call them snowbirds in Texas, or people who might take a 1, 2, or 3 month rental at a lower rate during the off-season. And so that's how to think about the monthly furnished rental category. We call it midterm because it's very literally between a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. And you think about those pillars of the industry being kind of like Airbnb, Vrbo on short-term, Zillow, apartments.com on long-term, and Furnished Finders kind of the scrappy underdog in the middle. And so with that, Katie, I'll throw it back to you and we can get into some of the questions we've got.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to go through kind of the most common questions that we hear about pricing because we have the 2 experts here and we want to hear it straight from the source. So we are going to start with short-term versus midterm versus long-term. We just talked about there's kind of these 3 fundamental ways to rent your property. So how do a midterm rental host or a monthly rental host goals with pricing differ from those who are focused on short-term or long-term? And how should understanding that distinction shape their pricing mindset? So Jeff, I will throw it to you first.
Yeah, in general, I see it as a spectrum where the most complex pricing happens in short term. And so you're pricing, updating daily for the next 365 days, being aware of events, being aware of seasonality, being aware of how, the tenant types might change over the course of the year, and really being aware of your competition because there's so much competition in the space. It's super complex, and doing it well often requires tools like PriceLabs because you can't just kind of post-it note yourself together through the process. It gets less complex in midterm because at a minimum, you're pricing months, not days. And you're typically pricing less seasonality, less events. And so you're kind of getting into a space where you can start to self-manage, but you need data to be good at it. And that's something we're working at. And Richie will talk about more how they're going to support. And you get into long-term, and it's actually quite a bit simpler because you're pricing by the year. There are fewer competitors out there. And so it's easier to kind of just basically make it work with comp sets. The other thing I'd add is that short term's typically where you're trying to yield the most. So your ADR is the highest. And as you move into midterm and long term, you're basically trading into more cash flow consistency and less risk at the expense of higher yield. And so there are hybrid strategies where you can get a little bit of the best of both worlds. But midterm is basically meant to be somewhat of the hybrid strategy. Some of the yield benefits of shorter term and more occupancy risk without the lower daily rate that you would get out of long term. And so that's the way I think of the ecosystem, and I'll let Richie chime in with more.
I fully concur with what Jeff said, right? You're fundamentally starting to think your highest price would be at short-term rentals, then you'd have slightly lower on midterm rentals and then slightly lower on long-term rentals. By the way, I saw someone say that my voice was not clear. Is it clear to you, Katie and Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're all right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so yeah, like you're thinking of that spectrum. The really as a midterm, you have one increased complexity that you're not thinking as much on the short-term rental side or on the long-term rental side, which is making sure that you have high occupancy rates, right? You don't want to in short-term rentals. You can say, I can keep my calendar open for the next X many months or years, and I can still keep getting bookings, right? In midterm rentals, you want to keep your calendar open, but you want to be strategic about how you're thinking about your minimum stay strategy as well, and not just your nightly pricing. So that's one added complexity to what I would add that you want to think about when you're trying to think about your midterm uh, pricing strategy, or in fact, like the overall revenue management strategy, right? You're trying to think where should you be priced. There is some level of seasonality based on the markets that you're in. You're not doing events as much, but maybe you're doing some level of seasonality, right? You're saying high season versus low season versus shoulder season, etc. And then you're also trying to think when should I take that booking, or when should I start discounting, and how much gap do I leave between two bookings, or should I leave zero gap, right? So
Yeah.
like a question for you to think about is, I have a tenant in there for next 2 months, and then I let's say they check out on July 31st, and I have an inquiry for August 20th. So I have a 20-day gap in between. What do I do? Do I decline that August 20th inquiry, or do I take that August 20th inquiry because I don't know what will happen, right? And so that's the complexity that you start to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Richie. In terms of occupancy and strategy for calendar is a little different than ADR. I think of short-term rentals as like it's a Jenga cube or a game of Tetris. You're constantly filling in these gaps in your calendar. Annual, not at all. You know, lose a tenant, gain a tenant. Midterm's a little more like annual in most cases. You take a tenant, about half the time they extend, and so you don't want a bunch of outstanding bookings in the future. And you're really optimizing for, you know, when someone gives you notice, you've got 30 days to lease up and minimize your occupancy gap. But a great short-term rental can be 70% occupancy over the year. A midterm rental, probably more like 90, 95. And a long-term rental should basically never have occupancy until the annual lease comes up, which could be years.
Availability. This should have 100% occupancy.
Yeah. Oh, right.
I think that's a great thought. I think a lot. I've heard it once described as with monthly rentals, you're dealing with larger puzzle pieces, putting together a puzzle. So if you're missing one, it's a bigger impact, right? With a short-term rental, you have 1,000-piece puzzle. So if you're missing, 100 pieces, it's only 10%. Whereas a midterm rental, it's a bigger puzzle, so the pieces just are more meaningful. So I really like that. I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about until further down the road. So great insight to bring up front. Let's move along to the next common question we have, which is what are the steps that a landlord should take to establish their optimal initial pricing strategy? So if I'm brand new to monthly rentals and I'm looking at that box on Furnished Finder in my listing saying, what's my monthly rent that I'm charging? And where do I go? What do I start? How do I even begin to come up with a number? And again, let's toss it to you, Jeff, first, and then we'll wrap up with Richie.
Yeah, I'll take the basics, and then Richie can get a little bit more sophisticated as their product and experience is. So at a basic level, and I saw one of these come through in the chat, the first thing to understand is your cost structure. How, what's my mortgage? What's my principal and interest? What are my utilities? What are my taxes? How much money do I need to be setting aside every month for a maintenance hold or a vacancy gap? And really go through, in order to break even, I need to make this much money. And I would certainly consider that plus some profit margin as your floor price. Now, people do sometimes think about these investments as just breaking even is fine because they're going to make money on the appreciation, or maybe they want to be using it some months. And so you can have a strategy reprice below your cost, but as a rule of thumb, go figure out, your budget for the next year and what your total cost is, and be sure your rent's going to cover that and provide a little bit of profit. So that's step one. And for a lot of people, that's gotten harder. If you've got a variable interest rate mortgage, or if you maybe are making a short-term transition due to regulatory concerns, you can't guarantee that you're going to be able to cover that cost basis without knowing you've got the right property. And so really start there. And then the second piece you do is you start searching for comparables. So what do I mean by that? Get on Furnished Finder, find 3 listings that look just like yours and see what they're charging. It's not out of bounds on Furnished Finder to contact one of those landlords. Hey, what's your experience been? How's it going? You know, how do you approach this, and how should I think about it as somebody new? You know, the extra credit I consider on this is to go shop Airbnb, where you can have a different type of selection. Now, keep in mind, Airbnb charges more than 10% in fees on every one of their bookings. And so really focus on what the landlord's charging, because the Furnished Finder value proposition is to put that fee money back in the tenant's product. And that's why tenants come here. And then really bonus credit would be to go shop an Extended Stay America or one of the midterm hotels nearby and understand what they charge for a month, and then just put yourself in the tenant's shoes. You know, if someone has the choice to spend $2,400 in Extended Stay America for a 600-foot efficiency, or $2,400 for my studio apartment, what's the better deal, and do you think they'll choose you? And that starts to be, I think, a good litmus test for how your pricing strategy works. We're going to be publishing a worksheet and an ebook on this topic soon to just kind of help people walk through those steps at the basics of here's where you start with pricing. Do keep in mind that almost all of our pricing is utilities included. And so you want to be pricing to cover that as opposed to passing it through variable on every step.
Yeah. I think Jeff, you hit almost all of the right points there, right? And almost all of the points. The one thing that I'd add in terms of instead of going to Airbnb, etc., right? You can use certain tools that PriceLabs has, like market dashboards or neighborhood data. And we'll happily share links after this, or share details on how you go about doing this, right? But with tools like market dashboards or neighborhood data, we are scanning Airbnb, we are scanning VRBO, and hopefully soon we'll be working with Furnished Finder as well to figure out how together we can come up with a product specific for monthly rentals, right? But with that, we can help you figure out what should be the monthly price, at least based on competition for a given season and a period. And you then use that to saying, do I want to be slightly higher than that, slightly lower than that? Where do you want to play? And so that's kind of how you start thinking about it. You may also want to think about a little bit on the side of, if I'm going to get a multi-month rental rather than month one, versus if I'm going to get someone's coming in with a 2-month request or a 3-month request, right? Do I add a slight discount on top of that of my standard pricing so that I can lock in slightly longer rental, right? And so that's kind of how you're going to play with it. But for the base price, like Jeff said, you either go on one of these platforms to search, or you can use our market dashboard tools or neighborhood data tools, where you can find what should be the average price for a given month, and what do we see demand for a 30-night stay or longer stay look like in those markets, right? And so that can help you figure this out. Then the second thing that I would say is also you want to then again, I go back to the occupancy side of it, right? You also want to start thinking about the occupancy side of it, saying as you're establishing this, and Jeff may have better thoughts on this, right? But how long do you want to keep your calendar open as you're starting to establish the first property as you're putting it up, right? But you start with a base price based on competition set. Of course, you want to keep your minimum threshold based on whatever your mortgage payments are or any other liabilities that you have. And that is kind of how you define it. I will urge you to think about some level of variability in your average monthly price given seasonality, right? Not all months are equal in terms of demand, and so you can play with seasonality, and you can say, I can generate maybe a couple of percentage points more in some months versus other months, and so you should try to experiment with that. And market data tools allow for that. And then next, you should think about how long do you also open the calendar. And Jeff, I'm not sure if you have guidance on that.
Yeah. One thing on Richie's point on PriceLabs is when you're doing this yourself as a consumer, just shopping Airbnb or Furnished Finder, you don't have any historical data. And I think there's a lot of value in them also being able to tell you the trending data and how that works. And so that, to me, that's the real benefit add there. A couple things reaction to that and some comments I saw. One was, how do we think about comparable listings? Like, what's the right geography? Put yourself in the tenant's shoes. If you're 15 miles further from a hospital than the competition, you should be at a discount to the competition unless your house is that much nicer. But really just try and think about who's my target tenant, and as much as possible shop in their shoes. In general, I'd say the more proximity, the better in terms of doing your comparable listings. The other thing that's important when you think about rates is rates isn't just the amount you're going to charge per month. It is also how you're going to get paid and the policies associated with it. So your deposit is a big deal. If you've got a deposit equal to a month's rent, that's going to be a deterrent versus somebody who might charge half a month's rent or even less. And if you require, we've had a lot of struggles with this with short-term rental owners who come over. If you require 30% upfront or maybe a month's payment 30 days in advance, that's a disadvantage. Most of our landlords are collecting money, a small deposit, or even just collecting everything a few days before move-in. And so think about the whole collection of how people pay. Should we move on,
I just
Katie?
have one little nugget to add
Go
here,
ahead.
and that is when you are searching the map as a Furnished Finder potential tenant, you're acting as a tenant, take a look at those availability dates. If you're looking at a listing that does not have a lot of availability, it probably means that their pricing has been pretty successful. If you're looking and their calendar is wide open for as long as you can see, it might mean that they are overpriced. So I think that's another great signal that everybody can take in when they are looking to shop. So, all right, let's keep it rolling. We have our base price. I've said, okay, maybe I want to charge 2,000 a month or 3,000 a month, just kind of based on what I have. How do I know when my pricing is off? How do I know when it's time to adjust? How long do I need to wait? How do I know it? What signals do I need to watch for to say, oh, I thought I hit the mark, but I need to adjust something here. Richie, what do you think?
I think the only true metric that you ultimately want to look at is, do you get a booking or not, right? And so if you're not getting a booking, right, you need to adjust your strategy, right? And if you have built a comp set, right, whether you're using PriceLabs to track that comp set, or you're looking at it on, say, Furnished Finder, and you've said, these are the 10 other comparable companies that I'm just going to track, and you're seeing them get, they were available when you last checked, and now they're not available, something's off, right? The first thing that I would say is, I think most first-time users generally price themselves higher because they look at the market and they feel like, oh, but my property is better than the market, right? And they price themselves higher. That's the most common tendency that I see, right? And then the second common tendency that I see is absolutely counterintuitive of that. They just price themselves too low relative to the competition, right? You want to be very, in a midterm kind of a situation, you want to be very close to your competition set, not crazy high, not crazy low. Crazy low signals that there's something off with this property, right? Because there's no good measure of saying what is the quality of a property. If I'm booking a 5-star hotel, whether that's Ritz-Carlton or whether that's St. Regis, I know what I'm going to get. And if it is coming at a cheap discount, I'm going to book it regardless, right? Because I know exactly what I'm going to get. But if you're priced too low relative to the market, then people start to think something's fishy, right? And then if you're absolutely new, you don't want to be priced too high. So I think you want to be priced right in the middle of your competition set, and then you want to track your competition set to, if you're not getting a booking, you want to know if the market's getting a booking. Again, PriceLabs market data tools can help you figure out, are markets getting bookings, right? Both historically, do those market gets booking, and future, are bookings coming in? But also, you can also do this manually if you're tracking some competition set and saying, these are the 20 that I'm going to refresh every so often to see, are they still available? And if you see them not being available, then you may need to fix your pricing strategy. One last thing that I would say on this, though, is the one thing that we often see is sometimes that your pricing is fine when you start off as a new host, right? It might just be that you need to like just do a little bit better on your photos or on your descriptions or on how you describe your amenities, etc. Right? And so spending that extra half an hour there or an hour there may also go a long way. So it may not always just be pricing, right? If you're not seeing things happen on pricing, you may want to make sure that you have the most spruced up storefront available.
Yeah, and three things I'd add. I mean, we have Furnished Finder has a lot of work to do to be more helpful on pricing. So trust us, we understand we can do better, and we're going to work on it. And so what I would describe as if you're a landlord on Furnished Finder, three things you should do to check your pricing. One, we have something called the listing performance panel in your dashboard. It shows you how many times your page is getting viewed, and it shows you how much demand you're getting. If in coming soon, it's going to be showing you your impressions, how many times you showed up in search. If you're getting a lot of impressions and not a lot of demand or page views, your price is probably too high or your photo's not great. So that's kind of step one. Step two, we have a tool called housing requests, which show up as unmatched leads in your dashboard. It's a decent indicator of what people are shopping for to kind of see, okay, this type of person's looking for this budget, and you can use that as a data point. It is not representative of all the market, but it can be a data point to help. And then the third thing is in short-term rentals, the dopamine hits really fast. Like you get a booking, you don't even talk to someone in most cases. Bing, cash register rings, you've got a booking. We're a classified site. And so a lot of times you're going to get a booking request or a message or the phone's just going to ring. And by all means, in every one of those occasions, ask people, how much are you looking to spend? Because it is a little bit more flexible in terms of the dynamic. And you can start to use that to build your own data set as to whether you can take price up or down based on those conversations.
Yeah, I think to your point, Jeff, sometimes you can have conversations with these leads and they can say, can you confirm what your deposit is? And you might say $2,000 and they go, ooh, that's high. And you're literally getting that feedback.
Yeah.
So when you're getting that feedback, make sure you're listening. All right. I am going to have us roll through this question. I feel like all three of us could probably, especially Richie, could probably talk about this question for days on end. But there are some people in our webinar today that also are hosting short-term rentals. So if I am considering a hybrid strategy, so I want to rent my property sometimes short-term, sometimes monthly, what are some strategies I should keep in mind for that?
I think there's three things I'd keep in mind, but I'd start with not every short-term rental is a good midterm rental. 70% of our properties are 2-bedroom or less. Most of our properties are in urban, suburban areas near primary schools, hospitals, universities, commuter corridors. They're not on the Gulf Coast. They're not in ski and ski out destinations. They're less likely to be waterfront. So don't assume every short-term rental is good for midterm rental. You've got to be sure there's a tenant base there. Now, once you prove there's a tenant base there, I'd say there's three general strategies. One is a seasonal strategy. Michigan's the best example. Michigan, great summer short-term rental market, slower in the winter. A lot of people use Michigan for midterm rentals in the winter and try and get traveling workers, nurses, whatever, to get yield out of an asset that might have very low occupancy in the winter. Second strategy, I'd say it's more of like the catch a whale strategy. I'm on a short-term business, but I'm going to have midterm rental availability out there. And if I get one, great. But you're not really counting on it. It's just a great nice to have. And it's basically adding an additional channel for your monthly discounted rate that you power on Airbnb or Vrbo. Third opportunity, and I'd say this is where it's more monthly rental forward. And so we see more of this, but I don't know if you see as much on the short-term platforms, would be you keep your calendar for short-term rentals for 4 to 6 weeks. And you're always using it to fill in your immediate vacancy, but you're always blocking it out after 4 or 6 weeks to go get a monthly tenant in. Our average booking windows about 3 to 4 weeks. And so people are shopping, and you can use short-term rental to kind of keep the cash machine running in the near term while you get that mid-monthly booking, that's a little bit further out, and then you roll them over.
Yeah, makes sense. So for me, I think hybrid strategy is one of those things that I think is a fantastic way to approach and generate yield, right? It's kind of like saying, if you have money saved up, do you put all of it in CDs versus do you put all of it in money market funds, or do you take some of it in CDs and some of it in money market funds, right? So ideally, I'd say like that hybrid approach, if your market supports it, like Jeff said, if your market supports it and if your property type supports it, I think it's a fantastic tool to deploy. And like Jeff said, right, is the property size supporting a mid-market, not mid-market, sorry, mid-term structure, right? If you have a 5-bedroom, maybe it's not the right mid-term property, right? But if you have a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, maybe it's a mid-term property, right? And then secondly, you want to understand, again, sorry, I'm referencing our market data tools a bit too much on this call, but you can use market data tools to figure out, is there enough midterm demand that comes in? And if so, in what seasons of the year, right? So that's first, right? Like, is there a midterm rental strategy to be played, right? And then the second thing that you want to figure out is on which side of the risk and operational tasks are you, right? So again, I go back to money market versus CDs. Do you put 70% of your money in money market and 30% on CDs, or are you the reverse where you say 70% on CDs and 30% on money market funds, right? I'm sorry, I'm referencing a ton of investment things, but I assume many of you guys, or most of you guys know this, right? So if I'm thinking that way, then I'm starting with saying, am I midterm first with short terms filling in? Or am I short-term first with midterms catching up my slow season, right? So I'm going to think about this, right? And if I am midterm first, I'm going to figure out everything that I can do to optimize my midterm bookings, right? I'm going to go to speak to Jeff. I'm going to look at Furnished Finder. I'm going to look at every resource that Furnished Finder has to make sure I'm going to optimize my midterm occupancies, my midterm revenue that I can generate. And then if I have, like Jeff said, either the last minute or for whatever reason, let's say I have a gap in my calendar, I'm going to open that up to drive revenue through my short-term rental bookings. Now, reverse, if I am a short-term rental first, I'm going to figure out what are my peak seasons that I get bookings in for short-term rentals, right? What are my high demand dates, high event dates? And I'm going to make sure that those are always preserved for short-term rentals, because I know even though average occupancy on short-term rentals looks like 60-70%, but for those periods, the occupancy can look like 90% or 95% of the market, right? So I'm going to figure out my peak periods first, which again, you can figure out from our market data tools, right? I'm going to figure out my peak periods. I'm going to reserve them for short-term rentals. I'm going to make sure I get my bookings of short term on those times, right? And then for my slower periods, slow seasons, etc., right? I'm going to figure out how can I fill them with midterm specific, right? By either having for those periods stay restrictions that I'd have a 30-day stay restriction, and only in last minute I'm going to drop down that stay restriction to lower. I'm going to have some kind of discounting strategy of monthly discounts or weekly discounts in there to drive those longer bookings, right? And so that's how I'm going to approach it. The question for you to ask yourself is, like Jeff said, do I have the property? Does my market support it? And the third question, which side do I want to play? Do I want to be midterm first with short-term filling in, or short-term first with midterm supporting my slow season?
Love it. All right, Richie, I'm going to give you the floor for a couple minutes here and let us know how PriceLabs can help determine your pricing, because PriceLabs is a great piece of technology that anybody can use to try to determine your pricing or when you need to change it or get some more signals. But just give us a high level of when someone would use PriceLabs to help with their pricing and kind of how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that hybrid strategy, right, if you're short-term first with midterms as filling in, right, that's absolutely 100% our tool today does a fantastic job of doing that for you, right? You're going to come in, you're going to set your base prices. There are stay restrictions that you set up in PriceLabs, and you're also going to look at neighborhood data. We have a fantastic help article on how to think about the hybrid strategy. Right? And so you're going to use that to come up with your pricing structures, right? We're scanning the market to figure out what's happening in terms of bookings, what are high seasons, what are slow seasons, when events are happening in your market, how much should you be increasing prices for. Let's say you're in a city and Taylor Swift concert gets announced, or you're close to a hospital and there is some convention happening right next to that hospital, right? And you can drive pricing, right? And so you're going to, if you're primarily short-term first with midterm coming in, right, you're going to use PriceLabs tools today are fantastic for you to use for your short-term, for your midterm season. You're going to go in, you're going to change the seasonality settings a little bit. You're going to make sure that you're not, for those seasons, you're not doing as much demand-driven pricing. You're also going to make sure that you have you're supporting a longer minimum stay restrictions in those seasons, right? And so that's kind of how you're going to use PriceLabs tools. Now, when you are midterm first, we in the next couple of months we're going to improve our products on this, right? But today, what we can support you with is market data tools. You're going to market dashboards in PriceLabs if you're midterm first, and you're going to try to figure out a custom comp set for your property. So you're going to say, hey, I want to look at other 2 bedrooms in my region. And like Katie and Jeff were saying, you want to be realistic, right? If you're 15 miles away, then maybe you want to look at those 15-mile away properties and not right next to the hospital, right? But you're going to look at that custom comp set. You're going to filter that down. And from that, you're going to figure out, hey, how can I see demand trends in this market? And how can I see what the average realized price in this market was? And how many 30-day stays came in, et cetera, right? And that's what you're going to do. Looking at those tools, and then you'd come back to Furnished Finder, and you're going to plug those rates based on what you're seeing in this market dashboard tools, right? There's a ton of depth to go in there, right? To talk about and to show you how to do this, right? But if you are short term first with midterms as a secondary strategy, PriceLabs dynamic pricing tools, neighborhood data tools are fantastic for you. If you are midterm first with short terms filling in, and depending on how much short terms filling in, for the midterm piece particularly, you're going to use our market dashboard tools. And if your short terms, there is enough short term fill, then I'd recommend using our dynamic pricing tools for that short term fill.
Okay, let's keep it moving. I am actually going to have us skip over to common pricing mistakes, mainly because both Jeff and Richie have talked so much about dynamic pricing already. You guys snuck in. You already answered that question, so we're going to bypass it. Dynamic pricing is when you're adjusting your pricing up and down based on seasonality, demand, things like that. But I think we've fully covered that, talking about the hybrid method and using technology. So let's skip right ahead to common pricing mistakes. What are some common pricing mistakes that you both see when it comes to pricing a monthly rental? And how can landlords put themselves in a position where maybe they don't have to learn it the hard way?
Jeff, do you want to go first?
Yeah,
You see this more
I can jump in.
right?
Sure. So I think the most common, probably the most common mistake is that you add basically too many restrictions in terms of policies and turn people off because you don't build trust early. I've got a high cleaning fee, I've got a high deposit, I've got different utility caps, I've got charges for A, B, and C. And it starts to feel like, can I trust this landlord? It feels like they're nickel and diming me. And they're comparing it to what feels more like an all-in price in short-term rental. So my encouragement is to bundle as much of that as you can, and to be pragmatic as you start around either combining fees or build it into your rate. And then definitely to be more flexible on how you think about your deposit and your payment terms. You know, if you're trying to get paid 30 days in advance, for every month, more like a short-term rental might be, then it's going to be a real challenge, because you've got to keep in mind a ton of our travelers are on stipends and they're getting reimbursed. And so it's not leisure travel. And so for them, that cash flow difference is the difference between being able to take the trip or not take the trip. And so I think those are the most important things, to think about your pricing strategy as holistic, as opposed to just what's my monthly rate. And I've seen a bunch of people ask questions about cleaning fees. The cleaning fee should be something that is like soup to nuts, cleaning the entire home in a deep clean, but you're not cleaning except when they move out. You know, the average stay is 90 days. People are typically booking, as soon as tomorrow, but usually about 3 to 4 weeks out. And so you're really cleaning once over the course of 3 or more months, and you need it to be deep clean for that next person to have a positive check-in experience.
All right, Richie, what's the number one mistake that you see with monthly rentals?
I think Jeff hit it out of the park, right? It's the ancillaries more than the actual price itself, right? It's the restrictions that you have in any form and shape, right? You want to be pretty market on those restrictions and not be too restrictive.
Yeah, I love that. On Furnished Finder, we have 3 spots for you to add fees. And if you need more than that, you need to consolidate, reduce, or eliminate some of those fees. I've heard a lot of people say, "Can you ask more lines?" And I'm like, "Can you make less fees?" So
Right.
that would be
Well,
my, encouragement. Keep it simple.
Yeah, and that simplicity, Katie, is a great point. A lot of people will get someone who wants to sign a lease based on the fees they've seen on Furnished Finder, and then the lease has 3 sections of separate fees and deposits and structures that they were surprised by, and then you lose trust and lose the tenant. It needs to
Yep.
be consistent through the shopping experience.
Yep. I think transparency and clarity are your best friend here. And I also want to just really quick circle back to Richie's moment of it might not actually be your pricing, right? You might have your pricing totally nailed in and it's your photos or it's your description
Totally.
or it's how fast you're replying. Like those are also very important things. So, all right. Probably the number one question I always
If I
hear
can,
from, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
if I can step in there, right? We'll do this work with Furnished Finder as well, right? But we've looked at this data on Airbnb and VRBO, particularly on the short-term rental side, right? And we think a lot of hosts, right, close north of 25%, just have their properties poorly set up in terms of storefront, right? And so if they have it poorly set up in terms of like the photos or listing descriptions or amenities or something there, right? Which just your first photo is just such a terrible photo that it puts off someone, right? And so I'm not sure if it's the same pattern on the midterm rental side, and we'll discover that in coming months, right? But it's a key predictor of you getting a booking, as much as it is like as much as your pricing. Your pricing could be spot on, and I'm sure everyone who's on this call at some point has hopped into booking.com, Airbnb, or some booking platform. You see you shortlist a couple of homes and you're like, these prices are right, but I just don't get enough conviction by looking at this property's listing page, right? And so you such a strong driver of you driving a booking.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. All right, let's talk about this. Is probably the most common question that I've heard, and Jeff, I would be curious to see if you agree. But how do I know, or how do I predict if a monthly rental is going to be successful? If there's going to be demand in that area? Maybe I have a property I'm considering purchasing. Maybe I'm considering renting out a casita in my backyard, or a guest house, or an ADU, or renting out a room or two in my house. Jeff, what kind of tools and what would you look at if you were an investor saying, is this a good monthly rental or not?
Yeah, I would. Well, I'd start with, this is another place where we acknowledge we've got some room to grow. And so I'll talk to you about the tools we have and then what we're doing. But the tools we have, if you go to Furnished Finder in the top nav, it'll say Market Insights. We call that our stats page. It's furnishedfinder.com/stats. For every city in the US, you can see what's the inventory makeup, what's the pricing makeup. But the thing I look at the most, there's a line that says it's property page views. Think about that as how many times a listing page is viewed by a tenant. And then there's another line that's inventory. If you divide those two by each other, you'll start to get a sense of how much demand is there for every piece of inventory. We're working on publishing some tighter guidelines as to what's okay versus good versus great versus excellent. Somewhere around the 200 range, it starts to get interesting. But there is a lot of variability in it. And so think of it as if there's 200 page views for every listing, you're likely to be in a place where you're going to be able to generate a good return. So I'd start there, but I would also just rely on, you need to be in touch with your area and the tenants. I've seen a lot of questions around, well, I only want travel nurses. be sure you've got enough of them because they're 25% of our travelers. I encourage people to really understand and be open to all the tenant types and to go figure out what's going to work. And you've got to do that by like drive by the local extended stay America, see what types of trucks are in the parking lot, see who's coming, where's their construction, like what is is the university hiring or not hiring? Call the hospital, see if they're hiring travel nurses, things like that. Like there's a little bit more hustle here than there is in the short-term space or the long-term space because it's a newer category. There's just not as much data. And then the other thing I'd recommend is like go work with Richie's tool. Like they do great market analysis and they will give you address specific insights and you can extrapolate from that what a full midterm strategy might look like.
Yeah, and if I could add on top of what Jeff said, right? If you're trying to figure out if a market's good to support it, you're going to use the market dashboard tools. And I also saw some cleaning fee related questions. We also give you insights into what the average cleaning fees are in those markets, right? You do want to filter for comp sets because our dashboards data is all encompassing Airbnb, VRBO, etc. today. And so you want to filter down to a 30+ night stay kind of properties to look at insights, right? So you'd create something called as custom comp set. If you're looking at our market dashboards, you want to create custom comp sets and then look at data. But then you can get all kinds of insights, right? Does the market support midterm stays? How many by what season does that look like? What kind of amenities do I need to have for good midterm properties, right? What kind of amenity, like midterm properties get booking with which amenities? What cleaning fees in those markets look like? And so you can get all of that data for a market. And then we have some work to do here, but we also have a tool called Revenue Estimator, which can help you figure out how much money can you generate from a specific address itself. We have work to do there, I say, because today it supports largely short-term rentals, and in coming weeks and months, we're going to move that to also support midterm rentals, right? And so you'd hear from us as we do that. But that revenue estimator will also help you figure out how much money can you generate from that property, right? And then ultimately, in coming months, we'd also be working closely on the midterm rental side, figuring out how we can support pricing decisions there for you to make sure that even going forward into the future, you're not just looking at market dashboards and revenue estimator to come up with insights, but how can we continue to support you on your future journey as well?
I think that's awesome. All right, we are going to wrap up, and I think we'll have time to answer at least a couple of questions, at least based on how we answer this question. But I want both of you to pull out your crystal balls, and I want to hear what you think will be happening in the next year or two with monthly rentals and what could impact the market. What changes could we see? What trends are you anticipating? So Jeff, let's go to you first, because it's probably the most top of mind for you.
Yeah, I think there's two macro trends that are here for more like a decade than for 1 to 2 years. Like these are going to be reliable trends. The first macro trend is affordability. There's an affordability and housing crisis. There are not enough homes. Interest rates are very high. Inflation is still out there, and people are nervous about affordability. So what does that mean? One thing it means is that people are spending less money on furniture because furniture is a depreciating asset that is hard to move and expensive to move. And so a lot of people are just choosing to stay in furnished places. And so there's an opportunity there to yield more by furnishing. The second thing it means is that if you are someone on this call who might be lucky enough to have a lower interest rate mortgage, someone trading into that can't access that financing anymore. And so there's an arbitrage there to where you can provide them a more affordable option because of your financing structure, and you both win. And so I think you're just going to see more renters over the next decade than buyers, and certainly over the next couple of years, because it's going to take a while for rates to come back down. The third thing, and I've seen a lot of this in the comments, rooms strategies are really interesting. And so if you are thinking about renting a single room in your house, I think that's a great opportunity. 20% of all of our inventory is rooms. It's obviously an Airbnb product, but it's a big growing category. And in particular, the younger generations are more open to that as a way to house hack and a way to basically live and put more money in their pockets. I'd encourage people to check out Spare Room, which is a customer of ours and a platform that really focuses on that. But if you've got a 3 or 4 bedroom, you might think about it as renting 3 or 4 bedrooms and have that be a listing on our site, or the whole house. And you can kind of mix and match and see which one works better. But I think that affordability crisis is going to get more people into the room space. The second macro trend is just mobility. More and more workers and people in the US have the flexibility to work in different places, or the requirement to move different places to access opportunity. You see this with building data centers, you see this with construction trades, you see this with academics moving, and you see it with just like the general digital nomad population. And that is, again, something that they need places to go to with furniture. They're not moving their furniture all around the world while they advance their careers or chase these gigs. And so there's an unmet need there. And when you look at the space, the short-term players are more expensive, and the corporate housing or the multifamily space is a lot more expensive. There's an interesting niche here that feels kind of like 2013 to 15 in short-term rentals, where there's just a lot of opportunity to go be ahead of the curve and be the person who's been doing this 2, 3, 4 years at a moment when the trend starts to accelerate and catch up. So I'm really bullish on it from both sides, and think there's a lot of different ways people can play in the space.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The affordability angle is actually pretty interesting. I had not thought of that, Jeff. Very, very cool. I actually, if I can ask you a question, Jeff, are you seeing still a lot of the digital nomads coming on your platform and booking? Because I'm interested in that trend, because I think that will continue. I'm curious, like how you're seeing that.
Yeah.
Is that?
I'd say that it's not like peak, where I'd say the digital nomads were as much traveling for leisure as they were anything else. Like when kids weren't in school and you could live anywhere, there was just more availability for it. But there is definitely a durable trend of like, there is a new, I don't know if it's 5 or 10% of the workforce that can live anywhere. And they're not living anywhere all year round, but it's pretty likely that somebody might be in Texas where it's going to be 103 degrees next week and is choosing to live somewhere else for the summer and work remotely for 2 or 3 months, and is looking for a different type of accommodation than what you might find on an Airbnb or a Vrbo, because they might want to be a little bit more urban, but they do want to be in, a better climate or just explore something different with their family. I think that trend is quite durable and here to stay. And we see that growing quite a bit. I think you'll also see something that it's not really digital nomad, but it's basically going to be retirees and empty nesters who are traveling to be with their families, but are advanced enough to realize their families may not want them there all the time, and they should get a 1 or 2 bedroom nearby to spend 2 or 3 months with their grandkids. And we're actually seeing a lot of that, which is like a different type of snowbird, and I think is going to be an interesting use case.
Very cool.
It's interesting. I've seen. Go ahead, Richie.
No, go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to say, even from a landlord's perspective, I've seen so many new tenant types develop over the past couple of years as people realize, right? Oh, I have the ability to travel for 2 or 3 months and go, like Jeff said, go see my grandkids or go visit their family or just see a different part of the country, or, go visit where I grew up. It's these use cases you can just, once you get on a roll, you can keep going and going and realizing that there's so many. I think the awareness is just going to keep skyrocketing.
And it's interesting because you think about that, in particular, the retiring class, the empty nesters. They have a home that may be fully paid off. It's not really a leisure destination that's a good candidate for like Airbnb or bachelor party, but it may be a great opportunity for like a family in the neighborhood to live there while they remodel or build a home. And then that retired couple can go get a Furnished Finder, live closer to their grandkids for 3 months, or just live somewhere else and explore for 3 months, and basically fund the travel with their home that's fully paid off and in a place that has a lot of value as a monthly rental, but maybe less as like a bachelor party rental or a short-term rental for leisure.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Slightly morbid thought, but along that affordability stuff, and we've talked about retirees, but also maybe on the Gen Z side, right? People are having, like, families are becoming smaller and smaller, and so I wonder if that also allows them to travel for longer as well, right? Like if it's just me and my spouse or my partner, I can and I don't have the kids restrictions, right? maybe I behave very much like the COVID family as well, right? Where I can just go away for 2 months, 3 months, right? So I wonder if you see both at the retiree side, a lot more midterm travel happening, but also on the Gen Z side, right? Midterm travel happening.
I think, yeah, I used to think that the Airbnb Brian Chesky spiel around live anywhere was, from a Gen X perspective, kind of bullshitty. I'm pretty bought in for Gen Z now. Like, I see them living in these homes as a choice because they don't have to buy furniture. They have more flexibility and they can go explore. And we see quite a bit of that. They take a 6-month lease, maybe they'll stay for 12, but they've got the option to break it on 30 days notice and live somewhere else and just explore. And I think that's a pretty empowered way to live. It wasn't for me when I was 22, but I think it's really interesting. And I do think it's a durable trend.
Yeah. And I'm not a Gen Z, not a retiree yet, but I will be soon looking for a midterm rental in New York. So if someone has, I'm gonna hit me up, or I'm gonna go on Furnished Finder and find it. But I fully agree, right? This is a trend that's continuing to happen, where across the space, people are finding that they want to live more freely or travel more, or and that travels become more experiential, so they're wanting to live there longer, and plus you're also seeing it on the corporate side, right? Like traveling nurses or people relocating for jobs a lot more, etc., right? So I fully agree, this trend is going to continue. And from our side, I also feel like there are improvements that need to happen in terms of pricing decisions that need to be made in this sector. And over the coming year or two, we see us making a lot of improvements in how we serve market data, how we serve pricing needs for this market.
Love it. All right, you guys. Well, the bad news is we don't have any time for questions, but that means that we just packed so much information into this 60 minutes. I hope everybody found a ton of value. It's a huge privilege to get to sit down with you two together, with this audience. You both have such extensive knowledge in your areas. And I think just to be able to talk about such a specific topic for a solid 60 minutes is so great. I want to bring to everybody's attention real quick here. We do have promos for both sides here, as a thank you for being a part of our webinar today. $15 off your first annual listing with Furnished Finder. You're going to use Price Right 15, and then also 15% off the first 3 months with PriceLabs with MTR Price Pro. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. We will also be sending this webinar out as a recording to your email. So however you registered for this webinar, you will automatically get a replay. It will have these noted in the email as well. I hope that you are all able to take some actionable items from this. Even if you pull 1 or 2 really helpful nuggets of information, I encourage you to take the information you got today and take some type of action, whether it's adjusting your pricing, looking at a different market, listing your property, hopping on PriceLabs, whatever it is, something that will help move your business and your rental just one step in the right direction. All of those are going to add up and really make movement for your business. So if we didn't get to your answer and your question is burning in your soul and you really want help with it, please reach out to either of the PriceLabs or the Furnished Finder team. And we also both have extensive resources that are available online, but both of our companies really put customer service first, and reach out to us via our sites, contact forms, social media. We will do our absolute best to get back to you, especially let them know, hey, I was in the PriceLabs Furnished Finder pricing webinar. I had this question. I really want more information. Also keep an eye out on your social media and your email. We will be doing more webinars. I think these are so useful and helpful for everybody. So stay tuned in. And that's it for today. Richie, Jeff, any final thoughts as we log off?
Katie, thanks for doing a great job. And Richie, thanks for joining us. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, this was fantastic.
Thanks,
we covered a lot of ground.
And super big thanks to our teammates who are all in the chats answering your questions as you come. And if you gave us feedback or ideas, we comb through these chats and take feedback and ideas to heart. So just know that you are heard. All right. Thanks all. Have a wonderful afternoon.